Let's get more analysis. We've also roped in Ndzalama Mathebula, who's a lecturer in the Department of International Relations at the University of Johannesburg. So Ndzalama, thank you so much for making time to be with us. Look, Israel says its military operation is aimed at actually stopping Hamas from launching attacks on Israel in future. They've also submitted once again that South Africa had presented a biased and false claimed case that relied purely on Hamas sources. Do you think they made a compelling enough argument, though, in your view? And what was your general assessment of today's proceedings?
Good day, and thank you for having me today. So what we are seeing currently between in the ICJ case and how the Israel's foreign ministries is responding is actually in defense of themselves. And so then it doesn't become actually a substantial to actually support their point, because in this we would then need facts and evidence to prove that they're actually halting on the attack that they would have from Hamas in the future, which is not making sense, or it is really not substantial to actually present that as evidence or as justification to actually launch attacks on the Rafah offensive. Yes.
Look, now in February, Ndzalama, the ICJ declined to grant South Africa that request for provisional measures against Israel without holding a hearing, even though in March the court actually ordered Israel to ensure that humanitarian supplies did reach those who needed it. But the question remains then, has Israel acted in accordance with international law as well as its humanitarian obligations based on what you and the rest of the world has witnessed?
No, most definitely not. They have a clear agenda on attacking Palestine, and they haven't really heeded the advice that was given by the ICJ. But I think much of it actually comes from the ICJ not being able to actually coerce or enact laws into place. They can only give advisory opinion. But at the same time, it's Israel believing that it can actually shape or actually go above what we would call supreme law, international law in the whole world. So then it becomes challenging because their actions, they actually reflect a clear agenda of actually trying to attack Palestine in all forms and in any way possible, instead of listening on what the ICJ has advised.
On your point then, Ndzalama, of an advisory opinion, I mean, the stance that is always adopted by the Israeli, that they have the right to defend themselves, and the issue of hostages at this stage, honestly, thousands of innocent civilians have since been killed in Gaza due to the ongoing conflict, yet the ICJ, the ICC, even the UN seemingly cannot take a decisive stance in the matter, and scores continue to be killed. So what does this then say about international legislation in its entirety?
So international law is very clear, it's very tranquil to understand, very straight to the point, but then we have to consider that there are many clauses attached to it that embody what international law is and how it can actually be enacted, because now you have to understand that there's a supreme law that's called international law, just to reduce the anarchist nature of international relations worldwide. But unfortunately, in the international relations space, then we have this Westphalia Convention on Sovereignty, meaning that countries can actually do as they, not as they please, but then they can actually have the right to defend themselves. But then now the question is in how they actually choose to defend themselves, because if they're going to attack unarmed civilians, now it becomes a genocidal case whereby they are not really defending themselves. There are warring parties that actually on both agendas, but not on equal terms, whereby they have enough weaponry to attack unarmed people. So then it does not suffice for us to then say that they have enough sovereignty to defend themselves, because they are defending themselves from unarmed people, from innocent civilians. So therefore, how can we actually spot that as danger towards them as they perceive it?
Ndzalama, I mean, with sovereignty in mind then, surely reforms looking at these regulations that we're talking about, as well as laws, need to happen as a matter of urgency. How and where would these type of debates even start?
With the UN, the United Nations Security Council, the structure, so this is what many of the countries are actually always arguing against, whereby they're trying to understand as to why many of these states actually have the power to shape what we would call international law, which is superior at most, and it's above everyone. Unfortunately, you have a sovereignty cutting across, and not only sovereignty, but the power, how powerful a state is, in order for them to shape what we would call an umbrella term of international law that is supposed to see through the interest of each and every country in the world. So now the establishment itself, the architecture of international law, has been argued to be very biased in its nature, for excluding what you would term the global south or the unseen countries, emerging markets, because they were not even there when the law was enacted or was decided into place. So then it becomes a challenge, because many of the countries and their interests are then excluded. You can even look at how the the United Nations Security Council is shaped, whereby you have 5 countries with enough power to veto a resolution or a decision that's taken by many of the countries that are member states to the United Nations Security Council. So it's in actual fact that the architecture and how international law chooses to be enacted. So I wouldn't say that international law is a challenge at most, but how really we comprehend it, how we advance it, and how we choose to actually apply it. The architecture itself doesn't allow for other states to actually use international law to their advantage or to their interests. Instead, it is mostly shaped whereby you get powerful states using international law as a tool to advance their interests.
Ndzalama, thank you so much for that clarity. That is Ndzalama Mathebula, the Department of International Relations lecturer at the University of Johannesburg, also weighing in on the SA case against Israel out at the ICJ.